Welcome to The Debate. If you listen to financial advisors today, you will inevitably hear a terrifying number. They say you need at least $3 million to safely retire.
Right, it's everywhere.
It is. But what if I told you that number is a complete mathematical illusion? Our central question today is exactly that. Are we facing an unprecedented, catastrophic retirement crisis driven by structural failures?
Or is this so-called crisis largely a manufactured panic? You know, a fear-baiting narrative designed to paralyze workers or, frankly, sell them really expensive financial products.
Exactly. And this is a question that affects absolutely everyone listening.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you are in your 30s or 40s right now looking at your retirement accounts, there is a very good chance you are feeling a profound sense of panic.
Yeah, and this discussion emerges directly from a deep dive into recent data. We're looking at longevity preparedness, shifting financial markets, and these emerging community platforms that are fundamentally redefining life after work.
Right.
Now, I represent the perspective that the math of modern retirement simply does not work. We must face the grim reality of a structural collapse. While you, on the other hand, argue that this alarmism ignores human adaptability, you think the crisis narrative is aggressively pushed to manipulate retirees rather than empower them.
Yeah, that perfectly captures the divide. I look at that $3 million figure and I see a weaponized metric.
Well, I look at the baseline math and see an architecture that is failing. I mean, let's decouple your self-worth from that arbitrary number for a moment and look at the actual mechanics of the system.
Okay, let's look at it.
The real crisis isn't just that people are living longer. It's that we are trying to fund a 30-year modern lifestyle using a financial model designed for the 1950s.
Back when retirement lasted maybe, 8 years?
Exactly, 8 to 10 years. We are essentially driving a Model T on the Autobahn. The traditional three-legged stool of retirement, pensions, Social Security, and personal savings, has completely shattered.
I think we need to be precise about what shattered means, though. I mean, the model evolved, it didn't necessarily break.
I would argue it broke for the individual. Let's look at why pensions disappeared. A pension was like a massive cruise ship. It pulled a longevity risk of thousands of people. So if one person lived to be 100, the system just absorbed the cost.
Right, the law of large numbers.
Yes. But corporate liabilities became too high, so they shifted to the 401k. And moving to a 401k put every single worker into their own tiny rowboat. It forces them to navigate the exact same market storms completely alone. It unfairly transferred all the market risk, longevity risk, and inflation risk directly onto the shoulders of individual workers. Workers who, by the way, are not financial experts.
But they were never meant to be experts, which is why the tools are evolving. I mean, the entire doom and gloom narrative you just outlined is actually a psychological trap.
A trap? How so?
The financial industry has a massive vested interest in weaponizing these metrics to scare people into rigid, traditional saving models. Take that terrifying $3 million statistic. It assumes uninterrupted careers, decades of favorable market conditions, and zero human adaptability. The math you are relying on is static. Humans are dynamic.
But the math behind inflation and rising costs isn't static at all. It is aggressively compounding.
Sure, but
just look at the second leg of the stool, Social Security. It was originally designed to replace roughly 40% of a worker's income. Today, the typical monthly benefit lands between $1,700 and $1,900.
Which is a supplement.
But it's not acting as a supplement because the other two legs of the stool, the pensions and massive personal savings, have rotted away. People are relying on that tiny supplement to cover housing, healthcare, and basic survival. The result is that 45% of older adult households cannot cover basic living costs. We have built a Jenga tower economy for retirees. One medical event and it collapses.
Wait, but let's look at how those living costs and deficit projections are actually calculated. When people hear these massive deficit numbers, it causes complete paralysis. It triggers what behavioral economists call doom spending.
Doom spending. Right.
Yeah, it's where younger generations realize they can never hit this arbitrary manufactured target, so they just give up. They spend their money on short-term comforts just to reclaim a sense of control. The crisis narrative is self-fulfilling.
I see the behavioral risk there, but
And if we look at platforms like the Active Retirement Network, we see a massive shift toward retirement as an exciting next beginning. Structurally, younger generations actually have better access to auto-enrollment and retirement plans than any previous generation. People are adapting through flexible work and new community models.
I understand the appeal of that optimism. I really do. But let's look at the mechanical reality of your adaptability against something like the sequence of returns risk.
Okay, for those who might not live in the financial weeds, explain how you are applying that here.
Gladly. Sequence of returns risk is the danger that the stock market crashes right as you retire.
Right.
If you retire and a year the market drops 20% and you still have to withdraw money to buy groceries, you are selling assets at a massive loss. You are permanently shrinking the engine that generates your wealth. The market could rebound a year later, but your portfolio is permanently damaged because you sold off the underlying assets just to survive.
It's a brutal mechanic, yes.
It destroys you, regardless of how flexible your mindset is.
I concede that sequence of returns risk is a real, mathematical financial mechanic. But it only destroys you if you are adhering to a mid-20th century model of retirement where you completely sever all income streams at age 65.
Which many people have to do.
But that's the flaw in the panic. The metrics you are citing, the replacement rate models, the withdrawal rates, they all assume a hard stop. They assume you go from 100% labor to 0% labor on a random Tuesday and never earn a single dime again.
Because for many, physical decline makes that hard stop non-negotiable. You bring up flexibility, but let's look at what that actually means in practice. The Elder Index shows that nearly 50% of adults aged 60 and over have incomes below what is needed to live independently in their own communities.
Wow, 50%.
Yes, half the aging population is unable to afford the absolute basics.
But again, you are looking at an older population through the lens of total dependency. Millions are engaging in the gig economy, remote work, or encore career programs. We have to stop viewing part-time work or consulting in our later years as a tragic failure of the system.
Is it not a failure, though?
For many, it provides viable, highly engaging alternatives. The financial metrics are engineered to induce panic, so that you hand over exorbitant fees to wealth managers to protect you from this hard stop that you don't actually have to take.
Okay, but is what you are describing actually empowerment? Or is it just survival wrapped in corporate PR?
I think that's a bit cynical.
I mean, let's be intellectually honest here. You are taking elderly people who have paid into a system their entire lives, who no longer have pensions, who are being crushed by inflation. And when they are forced to drive for a rideshare app at age 72 just to pay for their property taxes, you are calling it an encore career.
Well, I just have to ask, is your concept of adaptability just a polite rebrand for elderly poverty and forced labor?
That is a highly rhetorical way to frame it. But have you considered that you are projecting a younger person's definition of leisure onto an older population that actively wants to remain engaged?
I don't think wanting to rest after 50 years of hard labor is strictly a young person's definition of leisure.
Sure, but not every septuagenarian working part-time is doing it purely out of desperate starvation. That is the nuance the alarmist view completely misses. Many report feeling entirely disconnected from meaningful roles when they face a hard-stop retirement. The loss of purpose is profound.
I don't disagree with the need for purpose.
Right, and the Active Retirement Network explicitly focuses on this. Retirees want to share their expertise, offer services, and remain part of the economic fabric. The alarmist view strips older adults of their agency, assuming that if they are working, they must be victims of a broken system.
I am not entirely stripping them of agency. I am looking at the sheer cost of keeping themselves alive, which inherently strips away their choices. And let's follow the trajectory of that 72-year-old gig worker. Because when that older worker inevitably faces a physical limit, it triggers an entirely different, much more devastating math problem.
The healthcare burden.
Exactly.
Healthcare is undeniably expensive, but the models projecting these costs out into the next 3 decades often ignore systemic innovations.
Let me set the baseline of those costs first, because the mechanism of this deficit is shocking. A typical 65-year-old household will spend $272,000 out of pocket on medical care in retirement.
It's a staggering number, yes.
Even with Medicare, retirees are losing nearly 30% of their Social Security income just to premiums, copays, and uncovered services. And the human element is even more concerning than the financial one.
You're referring to the caregiver deficit, I assume.
I am. The John Hancock Longevity Preparedness Index, which was developed with the MIT Age Lab, analyzed how prepared adults are across multiple domains. Do you know what the score was for care preparedness?
It was quite low, wasn't it?
A dismal 42 out of 100. It was the lowest score of all the domains. And what does that 42 mean mechanically? It means the infrastructure of human care does not exist.
Well, the traditional infrastructure.
The baby boomer generation is aging into high-needs care, while the working-age population that traditionally supplies nurses and home aides is shrinking. We have a mathematically quantifiable shortage of human caregivers. People have no idea who is going to take care of them or how they will afford it.
And that fear assumes that care in 25 years will look exactly like care did 10 years ago. It won't. The alarmist narrative entirely ignores the innovation stepping in to bridge this exact gap.
Innovations like what?
We are seeing massive expansions in Medicare Advantage, which fundamentally alters how preventative care is delivered. We are seeing a total revolution in telehealth that drastically reduces the cost of routine monitoring. And, crucially, we are seeing major leaps in automation.
Wait, you really think automation is going to solve a deficit of human nurses?
I think it will offset the catastrophic costs associated with them. Look at the developments in robotics. We are already seeing proof of concept technology like the Loki Robotics Home Assistant.
The robot.
Yes, this is a $22,500 unit with cameras, advanced mapping technology, and a 1-ounce pressure sensitivity. It can navigate a home, clean, and perform physical tasks that elderly individuals struggle with.
So the solution for a retiree who cannot afford groceries is a $22,000 robot?
Think about the mechanics of assisted living for a moment. Why does it cost $5,000 to $8,000 a month? You are paying primarily for human observation.
Observation and care, yes.
Right, someone to ensure the resident hasn't fallen, someone to fetch a glass of water, someone to monitor the baseline environment. When you compare a one-time cost of $22,000 for a robot with mapping technology that handles that observational baseline, you are turning a recurring catastrophic monthly expense into a manageable fixed cost. Automation becomes a highly viable economic solution. The tech will bridge the physical care gap.
It's an interesting theory.
The problem isn't that there are no solutions. The problem is that we are trying to solve tomorrow's longevity challenges with yesterday's labor models.
Okay, I see the economic logic in offsetting the recurring cost of observation. I'll give you that. But I am not convinced by that line of reasoning because it fundamentally misunderstands what care actually is.
How so?
Yes, a machine with cameras and pressure sensors might be able to clean a bathroom or fetch a glass of water without crushing it. But does a robot with 1-ounce sensitivity solve the deeper issue of holistic care?
It solves the mechanical burden.
But when an 80-year-old falls or experiences the terrifying cognitive decline of early dementia, they don't just need a physical task executed. They need human empathy. They need psychological grounding. A machine cannot provide that.
You are right about the empathy piece. I can see that a robot cannot hold a meaningful conversation or provide psychological comfort. But what it does do is remove the mechanical burden from family members or overstretched healthcare workers, freeing them up to actually provide that empathy instead of just doing physical labor.
If those family members are around, which brings us precisely to the third critical failure in this landscape, the isolation epidemic. The structural collapse we have been discussing inevitably leads to emotional devastation.
I agree that isolation is a major factor, but I suspect we view its origins and its permanence quite differently.
Well, the U.S. Surgeon General has officially declared social disconnection and loneliness a public health epidemic. AARP data shows that 40% of adults age 45 and older are lonely.
Yeah, the numbers are high.
We are creating a generation of invisible people. They're sidelined by a system that drains their finances, isolates them in homes they can barely afford to maintain, And now your solution is to replace what little human contact they might get from a homemade with a cleaning robot?
I completely reject the framing that this is a tragic, inevitable descent into isolation. Yes, the Surgeon General's report is sobering, but it is a snapshot of a transition period, not a permanent terminal state.
A transition to what?
You are looking at the breakdown of the nuclear family's proximity, adult children moving across the country for work, and you are declaring the end of community. But humans are profoundly social creatures, and they are actively rebuilding the social fabric right now.
Rebuilding it how, exactly?
By forming intentional micro-communities. Look at the data on shared housing. Golden Girls-style living arrangements are surging among older demographics. The alarmist perspective views an older adult taking on a roommate as a tragic sign of financial defeat.
Because often it is.
But many of these retirees are choosing shared housing intentionally to combat the very isolation you are talking about. How does shared housing mathematically change the baseline living cost? It cuts utility bills in half, it splits property taxes, and it creates a built-in safety net for that observation we were just talking about.
But that relies on finding perfectly compatible strangers willing to merge their domestic lives in their 70s.
Which is exactly why networks are forming. To facilitate it, look at the active retirement network we discussed earlier. Their entire stated mission is to help retirees discover purpose and build connections. They are creating provider communities where retirees offer services to one another, attend live events, and engage in expert sessions.
Right.
This is a massive, decentralized, purpose-driven community rebirth. It isn't just a cope. It is a new way of living.
I will certainly acknowledge that community networks and finding purpose are inherently positive things, but we have to look critically at what these platforms are actually offering to solve a structural financial crisis.
They offer resources.
The Active Retirement Network offers a 7Cs toolkit, customizable email templates for a provider hub, and live mindset workshops. That is wonderful for lifestyle enrichment. But can an email template substitute for the fundamental lack of a paid-off home?
That's not what it's...
Can a positive mindset workshop reverse the fact that someone's retirement accounts were eaten alive by inflation during a market downturn? You cannot positive think your way out of a mathematical deficit in housing, healthcare, and savings.
It is not about positive thinking. It is about resourcefulness. If you don't own a paid-off home, pulling resources in a shared living arrangement isn't just positive thinking, it is a highly effective economic strategy.
Sure, it saves money.
The reason the crisis narrative is so toxic is that it tells people if you don't have $3 million and a fully paid-off suburban home by age 65, you have failed and your life is over. That narrative breeds despair.
I agree it breeds despair, but
The alternative narrative, which is backed by how people are actually adapting, says the mid-century model is gone, but you have options. You can work flexibly on your own terms, you can co-live, you can utilize technology to offset costs, and you can thrive in a community-driven ecosystem.
But that adaptability is forced by necessity, not born of freedom. That is my central issue.
Does the origin of the adaptation invalidate success? History is full of societal shifts driven by economic necessity that ultimately resulted in new, vibrant ways of living. The gig economy, remote work, automation, and micro-communities are providing viable pathways forward. The financial services industry wants you terrified so you will hand over your capital. The reality is that human beings are remarkably resilient when old systems break down.
Resilience is a beautiful human trait, but it shouldn't be a requirement for basic survival after 50 years of labor in one of the wealthiest nations on Earth.
Well,
Let's summarize where we stand, because I think we have illuminated the core tension here brilliantly. My stance remains that the math simply cannot be ignored. We have a demonstrable systemic deficit.
a deficit of the old system.
Yes. The cruise ship of pensions is gone, leaving everyone in their own vulnerable rowboats. Social Security is mathematically stretched beyond its design. Healthcare costs are consuming nearly a third of fixed incomes, and almost half of older adults cannot cover basic living expenses. No amount of technological optimism or gig economy side hustles can fully compensate for the structural collapse of basic financial security. We are facing a genuine crisis of architecture.
And my position remains that clinging to an outdated model of retirement only creates unnecessary panic and paralysis. The metrics used to declare this a catastrophe assume zero human adaptability and entirely ignore the sweeping technological, medical, and social innovations happening right now.
You see it as manipulation.
Yes, the crisis narrative manipulates workers into doom spending or purchasing costly financial products out of fear. Adaptability, whether through shared housing to cut costs, part-time purposeful work to maintain relevance, or leveraging automation to manage care, is our greatest asset, and it is actively redefining what our later years look like for the better.
I think if there is a clear point of convergence between our perspectives, it is this. The old promise of adulthood, the idea that you work hard, stay loyal to one company, get a pension, and then rest completely for 30 years is definitively dead. That script no longer applies to the modern landscape, and pretending it does is mathematically dangerous.
Absolutely. We both agree that the landscape has fundamentally shifted. The disagreement is simply whether the new landscape is a barren wasteland or a different kind of ecosystem that requires new survival tools.
Which speaks to the immense value of looking at this issue from both sides, understanding the stark, unforgiving financial realities without succumbing to the paralysis of the manufactured panic is what actually empowers individuals to redefine their own goals.
Very true.
There is clearly much more to explore in the source material regarding how micro-communities, shared living models, and new technologies like robotics will mechanically shape our later years.
There really is. The data shows us the sheer scale of the challenges, but it also points toward the creative ways people are already solving them on the ground.
We will leave it to the listener to decide how to approach their own planning. But it brings us back to that idea of the Model T on the Autobahn. The old vehicle can't handle the speed and duration of the modern journey. The question is, are we going to stand on the side of the road panicking about the broken engine, or are we actively building a new kind of machine to carry us forward?
That is the perfect question to end on.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.